You're now listening to the Talented 10th podcast, but stop, like, subscribe. Let's get it. Okay, so here with my dad, not just Bryan, and keeping with the theme. Dad, I know you like red wine, and I went and got a cab. I know you're not used to maybe drinking a $70 bottle of wine, but we're gonna give it a try. I know you're a simple man, but let's have a glass of this Cabernet Sauvignon. I think it's a 2018. Bryan, if you can start us off, I'll start with a question. So, Daddy, we're gonna start early. I know you don't like maybe talking about raising us, so to speak, but in detail. But take us through. I think the last time we sat down, we got all the way up to, basically Bryan being born and Dumas and the ice storm and all of that. But how did you go from having kids, but then how you were going to bring them up in the midst of being a coach, in the midst of introducing them to basketball? How did you think about it, or it just like you weren't really that deliberate on the front end of it?
Well, I think you give some thoughts to everything a little bit. I guess probably in the quiet times you do kind of outline a general way you want to go about doing things. But it wasn't something that you look at every move and every decision and try to plot that in. But I did have a general way or view of kind of how we wanted to go about doing things.
So was that view around like when you start, what you do when you start, or what were those things?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit earlier about, I think people that are involved with the military or involved with athletics or things like that kind of, in many ways, have a built-in framework.
Cheers, by the way, fellas. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. You kind of have a built-in framework in terms of accountability, in terms of being on time, being consistent in how you approach things, and I think basketball kind of at least kind of allowed me some sort of a backdrop, a framework, and kind of how I wanted to go about emphasizing those certain things.
Okay. Can you draw a correlation to our early beginnings and then your early beginnings as a kid? Is that need for routine, or the utility you recognize in routine, does that date back to the farm where you had your chores before, or did you not go that deep?
Well, I don't think it's a conscious thing sometimes, but growing up for us, things were very simple. We didn't have a lot. Everything was kind of built on people taking care of their responsibilities, people, being honest and with an honest day of work and how you dealt with other people. And so that was always in the backdrop. It wasn't something that you had to consciously think about, but it was so much a part of the way you grew up that it was always there.
What does an honest day's work mean?
Well, for me, I think I remember Mama saying some things about we used to have to sweep the yard growing up and stuff. It was, and when I say literally sweep it, there wasn't grass. I mean, you literally took a broom and you swept the front yard. You got all the trash, everything off of it. That was kind of a weekly thing. And she made the statement that when I could do the job and not worry about whether she was looking or whether, with her standing over my shoulders, is that I would have reached a certain level, because now you're doing things because it's the right thing to do, not because you're going to get caught and get in trouble. And so honest days work for me comes into you doing what you're supposed to do, not because you're going to get in trouble or not because you're going to get rewarded or anything, but because you know inside it's the right thing to do.
Bryan, you got any questions?
Man, question for him. How did your upbringing determine what you wanted out of us? When how did it determine the different things that you wanted out of us by raising us? What were some things that you wanted to instill in us to become successful?
Well, kind of to build on what we had just said, I wanted you guys to work hard, to be accountable, to realize within, the world is tricky because you can't just say if you work hard you're going to get there. We know this from sports. There are teams that work so hard, but there can be a call or there can be a break or something like that.
Injury.
That can throw a monkey wrench and all of that. So just because you work hard doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna get what's coming to you. But at the same time, it puts you in a position in terms of what you can do. If you do your part, then if some of those tricky things come up, you can live with it because you know you've did your part of it. And so for me, I wanted to make sure we got you guys to the point that you could do that you could feel good about where you had put yourself, regardless of what maybe some unfortunate or dishonest or this and that, something that comes about. So I wanted to do that, and because I watched, when we were growing up, I watched Daddy, and when he was a sharecropper, and I would watch him work all year. And then about this time of the year, we would sit down, or I was younger, but I would sit down and I watch Mama and my mother. They would sit down with the books to see, because you got to the point of what did you make this year, and what you were going to clear. What did you have to give to the landowner, and what did you have to clear? And we would get to the point where we thought we're at a certain point, but then when you get to him to reconcile the books, they come in with something unforeseen. And then, and you're disappointed, you're mad, but there wasn't a whole lot you could do about it. So we saw those things, but we knew, and Daddy knew, he had worked as hard as he could and did the things that he was supposed to do to get to that point, even though unforeseen stuff came up.
Yeah, that kind of leads me to the next question around. Pretty good, isn't it? Not bad.
Very good.
How hard is it to not lie to your kids? When we talk about those lies that most parents tell, you can be anything you want to be, and if you work hard, you'll get like we just said. How hard is it to teach those hard lessons that you laid out that you wanted us to learn while not taking that shortcut of telling us the sweet nothings that aren't really true when life
Right.
is real?
Well, I think you do all that. You do that in stages. I think you instill the will and the accountability in terms of working hard. I think that's the first level you get to. But then, kind of like we run into today, a lot of times I don't think parents will take their kids to that level, and then they'll get to the point of difficulties and they start pointing out that the ref doesn't like you, the coach doesn't like you, such and this and that. And now we start looking for excuses, and rather than being accountable with your actions, you're looking around trying to blame other people when maybe you haven't did what you were supposed to do. And I think that's one of the challenges a lot of the kids that we're seeing here, contemporary in the contemporary part of this, that I think the stages are wrong. I don't think many of them establish working hard and accountability before they start pointing fingers. And, sometimes pointing fingers are legit, but you can't use that as a crutch because stuff happens and stuff happens that isn't fair. But I think you had an honest conversation with after you've established that first level. Then you can sit down with them and say, look, this shouldn't have happened this way. This was wrong. I mean, such and such. But if you get that ahead of establishing a foundation, you got a problem. Because I know I've thought about, in education you have parent-teacher conferences and stuff like that where, and I've seen people I work with go into conferences with their kids and you just wonder, you almost got to keep a distance because I know when you guys, I would intentionally, if there was a problem with a teacher, I would intentionally not be a part of it because I wanted you guys to learn to work it out. And that wasn't an accident. I wanted by design because, for instance, when you went to school, when you went to college, I knew I wasn't going to be there. You had to work it out yourself. And some kids will go in ill prepared for that because they haven't had to work out problems and deal with disappointments and face them head on all the way up. And then we ask them when they leave home, when they're 18, to suddenly start to deal with something they hadn't been used to dealing with all along.
Yeah. How was it, and this is more a question for, concerning me, how was it going through the process, the initial process with Bryan, and then I'm totally kind of different, but at the same time very similar with you, and the approach had to be different. Like, was that
In terms of
just our personalities were different, we responded differently?
right,
Yeah,
right.
that type of thing.
It's not honestly. That's when there's no blueprint because that's the thing about parenting. There is no blueprint. I mean, people can tell you what they did or this and that. That means very little because what you end up doing, you literally have to think on the run because it's kind of like we talked about earlier when having a conversation about basketball players in this era where you come up and you drill, but then when you get in a live situation and the defense isn't in the same spot that you drilled in, now you don't know what to do. Because now I've been used to doing this, and now the defense is here. What do I do? So in parenting, you got a situation where, let's say your first child, you might have did something a certain way, but then your second child has a different personality, and the procedure or the way that you went about doing something with child one, that doesn't work with the next child. So you have to be able to make an adjustment. You have to maybe say, well, I'm doing this wrong, and I got to reassess based on the personality and the way that the other child might deal with things that are different than his older sibling. So you have to be able to make adjustments, and if you're not willing to make an adjustment, it's going to be very difficult. And so, see, I had to make an adjustment, and I can remember consciously doing that because, for instance, we would have, and y'all remember them. We would, in the summers, we would come in. We would do math. We would do English. Then we do our athletics or basketball stuff, and we just kind of drill that on. That was kind of what our summer days were like, and but then, when we might do weights and agility and skill work and stuff like that in a hot gym, and and Brendan, you I don't do that. I do a little bit of it, and then I thought, no. And you're saying,
This is all true, so
yeah. So
he's not embarrassing me.
So we're sitting
They
there.
were there, so there's no way.
So Bryan Bryan probably won't do it either, but he bulled all through it. And then you were always the kind that, something like that, if you had a different approach, you didn't hesitate about giving your opinion on it. So it just came a point where, I had to realize that you guys were going in different directions. Your path, both of your path to success, it wasn't going to be the same one. It was going to be different. Doesn't make it anything wrong with it. It was just going to be a different path, and I just had to accept that and realize that, and it wasn't like it was it was just an adjustment on my part, just a mindset, just to realize what expectations and not try to just kind of cookie cut the whole thing and you being in the same path that he was.
Well, I appreciate it. I also, and I've told you this, I wrote a letter to you after my first year of law school on Father's Day, and it was really kind of one of those, you get older and you look back on things and you understand them differently and all of that, and it was kind of my letter to you to like, okay, I understand why you did what you did, and I also appreciated not immediately buckling. Like, I appreciate the mindset shift, but I also appreciate the resistance to change that mind until you had to.
Right.
Because there was a heck of a lot of lessons learned when you like, hey man, like you may not want to do it, but like you get, there's life works that way. And then I think, in those hot gyms, I remember one day I sincerely was like hypervent. I don't know what happened. And I saw the sweet side of you, even in the midst of that day and that competition of like, okay, he pushed himself to the limit today. and I'm proud of that. Although you didn't finish, right? That was one of the first times I saw pride, and even when you couldn't get it all finished. And that was kind of one of those were kind of one of those moments back when we were doing all the, the Mike Newell work, where we were doing the spot drills and getting into freaking 90-minute sailor workouts and stuff. And it was just insane. But yeah, I mean, I definitely get some stubbornness from you, but
Well, and I'll say this also. A lot of this kind of with my late younger brother Kelvis. See, I remember being the oldest, and I did things a certain way and got some notoriety in high school and such. And when he came up behind me, everybody expected him to do certain things in a certain way and live up to, and it was difficult for him, and because and he kind of rebelled and went a different direction, almost in response to kind of rejecting what everybody expected him to do. And so I, it, I had to come to grips with why he responded the way that he did, and if expectations would have been a little different for him, he might have responded differently.
so, and I'll let you jump in after this, Bryan. But so we had talked about, and then I had talked about Rakeem, kind of that breaking point night or whatever. I don't know if you remember it. I bet you do. Given what you just said about Uncle Kelvis, was that kind of one of those scary moments? Like, okay, I don't, he's 15, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
is this kind of one of those first signs of like, if things don't change, he may rebel and do all that?
I'm sure that was kind of a part of my calculus there. I don't know that I made a conscious connection, but things happen and you kind of pack them back and this and that. But at the same time, when you get to certain points, even that stuff you got packed away that you don't consciously think about, they kind of provide kind of some background to how you arrive at something. So I'm sure that was part of it.
Yeah. Bryan, you got anything? Before we jump into basketball talk?
So you've been coaching for how many years now? 40.
Oh man, my first year coaching was 82, 83. So yeah, we're looking at about 41 years.
Okay. All right. So you've been through several different eras, so to speak. So what's the difference in the first era and this last era right now for you? And if you could pick from the 80s all the way to 2023, which is your favorite era to coach?
Oh, to coach, so just so in my
Like we can say decade. We can say decade. So the first question would be, what's the difference between the first era in the 80s to 2023? And then what was your favorite era to coach?
Well, when I first started with my first teams, I would say, the game was obviously officiated differently. It was you probably saw a little bit more of an influence of in Arkansas, the influence of Eddie Sutton at the very beginning, man-to-man defense, more deliberate offense, Probably a slow to mid-tempo because we were still getting out of the Eddie Sutton, Henry Heiber type of era, but we were slowly transitioning in this state to Nolan Richardson. And so that's kind of what you see, that gradual formation or transition at least from more deliberate basketball to more open court, upper tempo type basketball. And yeah, and probably what we've seen during my time, we've gone from an era, like we say, of deliberate basketball, transitioning into Coach Richardson style. But even then, everything was more attack the basket. When I first started, there was no 3-point shot.
Man,
We
you're
had
old, man.
actually gotten to the point where when I was really young, I remember when Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was at UCLA, and they outlawed the dunk. So you couldn't dunk. So during the era of with Kareem, on the Bill Walton and the great UCLA team, you couldn't dunk the basketball. And so we've seen all of those things. So you've gone from deliberate, up-tempo, the incorporation of the 3-point shot, and you know, we went through the physical era of basketball with, like in the NBA with the bad boys and this and that, all the way now to a period where you can't hand check, you can't play with the physicality that you could play back then. So physicality and tempo and things of that nature kind of stand out as having changed over the years.
And what was your favorite era of those?
Probably my favorite era would have been in terms of if we think in terms of the NBA, I would say the Showtime era when Magic.
So
and
transition
Kareem,
back, the combination of deliberate basketball, half court precision, but the beginning of fast break,
Right.
easy buckets.
right.
Got it. Yeah. What's it like coaching high school? Like, what do you enjoy about not just being a coach, but being a teacher as well? Because I know oftentimes coaches don't get credit for teaching, but you enjoy that as well,
Well, it's
or enjoyed. You don't do it anymore, but
it's a challenge. Yeah, coaching at any level is a challenge. There are just different challenges at the pro level or college level, and on down to just the lower grassroots. But you just find young people at their very formative ages where they haven't, and I say this in the age of trainers and different things like that. I'm not saying that they hadn't formulated themselves, but it's they're just kind of in flux. They're trying to find out where they fit, who they are, and it's a challenge in that sense because they don't really, in most cases, they don't know who they are.
yeah. That's why I laugh at when people are coaching young kids and they're wanting them to know things, and you're like, it's like my dad coached high school basketball with kids that haven't figured out, and you want 7 and 8 year olds to
It's
have
like
figured
spending
out.
a day in middle school, and you know, middle school. If you're teaching, I'm not sure that middle school isn't the most difficult level to coach. I mean, to teach, because they don't know. I mean, they're caught between being a kid, being a teenager, and they don't know who they are. And so basketball on a high school level, to some degree, is kind of like that. They see things on television, They see LeBron or they see Steph Curry and this and that, but they don't understand the hours and the time that Steph Curry and LeBron have put in to become what they are. And a lot of times they think they can do that without having invested the kind of time that those are in. So they see them on game day and have no clue what's going on between those games and leading up to it. But they think they know. And a lot of them, they're just convinced that they know a different route or easier route to get to their destination, and there are no shortcuts, but they think it is.
Mm-hmm. This is a good point. There's no shortcut. There may be different routes, but it ain't going to be a shorter cut.
No shortcut.
Ain't no shortcut.
But they are convinced that they know something that you don't know, that they know a different, a back door into this, and it doesn't exist.
No, it does. I think pretty much what he touched on with, just knowing, it ain't just, college. I mean, I coach college. The college guys don't realize it either on, the work. And I think one of the good things, we went to Minnesota a couple of weeks ago, and Mike was able to get these guys tickets to go to the Timberwolves and the Knicks game.
Mm-hmm.
And several of them, that was their first time ever being to an NBA game. So it was great for them to see the pace of the game, how big and strong, physical these guys are, the different reads that these guys can make in a split second. I can remember someone's like, man, Coach, all those guys can make different reads. They made reads. They didn't think a lot. It was just boom, boom, boom. Mm-hmm. It was just flowing. And I thought that was like, man, this was huge for these guys to be able to come in and see, see just for instance, like Jalen Brunson.
Yep. Pace, manipulation of pace. Yeah.
His strength. You look at him as a scorer, but even if you watch the game, he makes different reads, different passes. You can see so much more in person than maybe you can see in just a little cutout of on a TV. So, and I would challenge a lot of people, not just the NBA game, whether it's a Division I game, D2, D3, NAIA, JUCO, whatever. They don't realize how good these kids are even at a JUCO or NAIA or D3 level. Because some of those guys could be playing at a level up or level 2 levels up than where they ended up at. It's just, the circumstances, numbers game.
Right.
Maybe they've had some kind of issue or, you just wasn't seen and that's just where you ended up.
Yep.
But a lot of these guys couldn't go at some of them levels and get stuff done. They think they can.
Well,
but they can't.
No.
I think so. To bring the point y'all both made into my life, people don't get that even at a corporate level, right? Like when we're talking about kids coming out of college, or even if you've been out of college, you're trying to go into a new role that's elevated or whatever at a particular company. The level of expertise for those that have been there, been stable in their approach, and clear in their approach and all these different things, experience all of that. Like, it's from the outside looking in, you may, have this impression of what you're coming into, but the reality is there are people there who are rock stars. And I want to, this will lead to my next question, but one of the best things that ever happened to me was the class that I was a part of in Monticello. For all its faults socially, we could be less than exciting. We were super smart. Tons of teachers, kids, and just flat out just intelligent people. Being in an environment where I was not the smartest on everything was critical. When you're not, we were talking about AAU and at an early age, realizing the level of competition in different ways. And we often talk about the positive side of seeing that, hey, I do measure up to these New Yorkers. But what could be negative, thankfully, can be positive as well, is like, okay, I'm not the best. Just because I was the best on the Celtics doesn't mean I'm going to be the best on the Hawks or the best on. Daddy, what is it like from a pride perspective or even a nervousness perspective when you see your kids being introduced to them not being the best, not being entitled to being the best? Like you said, your hard work doesn't mean you're going to be the best. It doesn't mean that there isn't someone out here who could work less than you and be better than you. Like, what is that? What is watching that take place like?
Well, the transformation and I was thinking about this earlier, the transformation, and I had this conversation with our present squad, is that when you get to a point or you're competing against somebody, you're not, maybe they're as good or maybe they're a little better. Now it comes to playing chess rather than checkers. Can you prepare yourself in a way? Can you understand? Can you approach things in a manner that I can get something done even though you're better than me? And that's a heck of a step, because now, like I said, you're not playing checkers, you're playing chess. And now you've gone to a different level. And the people that are successful many times are people who make that jump, because most of us know somebody either in our hometown or somebody in the immediate area that was just super talented that should have made it and didn't. Now, they might have had it could have been family, it could have been personal things that stopped them, but sometimes it's getting to the point of, now I'm not the best guy. How do I transition? How do I handle that? And a lot of folks can't handle that. They'll get
and by a lot of folks, you mean the overwhelming majority.
Yes, because you think about it, on the Division I basketball team, on how everybody that comes to that team, all 13 people, were the best guys on their team. Okay, now how do you respond? I mean, can you take it to another level? Even if you can't take it to another level physically, can you take it to another level in how you approach the game, how you prepare yourself, how you condition yourself, how you eat, how you rest, can you do that? Are you willing? Can you do that? A select few can. A bunch of folks can't do it. Most of them can't. They don't do it.
That, when we were talking about the contrast and who we are and kind of working or parenting and coaching through that, that was the best lesson I learned indirectly from following up Bryan. There did come a point there which I'm not gonna be better. I'm not gonna be better than him. He's better. How do I be just as good at something else?
Yeah.
Was like I felt like I was forced, but I wasn't forced. But my mentality made me feel like I was forced to figure that out. Having to do that as I don't know, maybe freshman going into a sophomore year of high school, like figuring that out, it sucked, but I had to. I wanted to be the best student council president. I wanted to be the best student. I wanted to be the best, you just name it. And it was like, if I can't be the best basketball player, I could at least be the best at this and this and this. And in my head, I'll add it all up and see if that stacks me up with, because I was competing against you guys, not in a rat race, crabs in a bucket kind of way, but in a, well, I live with them. What's so impressive about Bryan? What's so impressive about Coach Sherrer? Like, I was just motivating myself to be something within whatever I chose to do, and it respected on the same level. Well, there's a level of,
Well, you think about it, you put it in a football context. The best quarterback in terms of talent, maybe that I can remember, was John Elway. He could run. He was big. He could throw. I mean, he was as talented as any quarterback I've ever seen. Okay, most people will say, when they start talking about the best quarterbacks of all time, you bring up Brady, Montana. Those guys were not nearly as physically gifted as Elway. If they had tried to go about things the same way that Elway did, we wouldn't even be talking about. But they found different ways to find success, and neither one of them were nearly as physically gifted as Elway. Because Elway was as gifted, and there might have been a quarterback that's played that was as physically gifted as him. But it goes into that, a person finding what route can I take to be the best? And they found alternative routes from what Elway did. And in the end, no disrespect on Elway, they had better careers, and I know there are other things involved and such, but when you look at the all-time greats, they're probably going to be ahead of Elway on the list.
Not just because of accomplishments, but because of maximization.
Yeah, it's maximizing what you had and taking it to a level that most folks thought they couldn't take it to.
Yep.
Even Manny.
Yeah, Manny, for sure.
Like, he wouldn't.
And then Eli
had better tools than Peyton.
He did.
But his was mind, study, anticipation.
Mm-hmm.
His was just almost to a exact science. But his, that's what was all I enjoyed with him. But his was like, Eli had way more tools than he did.
So so to me, that's some of those people, those gifteds of special breeds, can, whether they consciously recognize it that way and take that route, I can't say, but they just find ways, and they just mentally, and then you take a guy like, back to basketball, then you take Jordan and a LeBron who are supremely physically gifted, and they take it to a level that, then there's no stopping them.
The trifecta of it. So they're physically gifted. They take the mental reps and are mentally engaged and gifted, and they bring a yeoman's work ethic.
Yeah.
So they complete the trifecta.
So the trifecta they complete. So there is no way. They're destined for the top. Because that combination, those are generational things. You just don't.
And that crosses all. It's not sports. It's across everything in life. Most people don't marry the God-given, the earthly developed, and then the
because they rely
the
so
maniacal
much. They're gonna rely some more on their physical.
Yeah,
and they don't.
Right.
They
because
don't
you can be great. You can be
other.
great with two of the three.
Well, and think about this. Think about how many of the great coaches were great players. Most of the great coaches in sports were the role player, bench guy.
Point guard.
Yeah, they weren't the because for them to just survive, they had to really understand and pick up things and be on top of things. Whereas that super talented person maybe didn't have to pay attention to some of that stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, and so
And they also can't teach you what they did because you can't do what they did.
you can't do
Exactly. And that's the Jordan. The Jordan
Bill
problem.
Russell. Bill Russell was a perfect example of that. I mean, he had some success when he was a Celtic. When we went to the Sonics and different, he struggled there
King.
because Magic, the same way.
Yep. Before we dive into basketball specific, you got any other follow ups? I do. I have one, and personal one. He was 10 when you and Mama got divorced, but that was in the middle of his success in AAU. Were you concerned about not the personal side of you and Mama, but were you concerned about how that may affect the Hawks and in the middle of the national championship runs and stuff like that? Were you a little worried about that?
Yeah, because that's kind of at the beginning. Because I guess I think Bryan first started probably 9 years old. Was his first.
I thought it was 11 when.
I think you and Mike played.
Yeah, no, I'm saying now. I'm talking
It
about
was
when the
98,
divorce.
so you were 10.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
10.
Yeah.
Well, what I actually thought, and this is something that I believe to this day, that when you're going through difficult things personally, the busier that you are, the more engaged you are in something, the less time you got to sit around and lament and feel sorry for yourself or ask what. Stay as busy as because I mean even myself, if I'm going through difficult times, I'm gonna try to stay as busy as I can because if I'm it's only when things are quiet and peaceful and this and that it still starts racking in my mind. I can't believe it. That's when that happens. But when you're going and you're locked in on something, you ain't got time to think about this.
That's true. That's a great point. And it's probably why it affected me a little bit more because I wasn't playing at that time. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense.
That's how I looked at it then, and that's how I've always looked at it. I mean, so it's just like some of the things that I've gone through over the years. I mean, basketball has helped me because I was always busy.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we're going to switch gears into the basketball-centric part. Check this.
Need some more?
No, I'm good. No, it was pretty good.
Okay. I'll start it off with a personal, and then we'll get into some of our favorite players' favorite basketball moments. What were your proudest basketball moments what's your proudest basketball moment for Bryan and then for myself? And then we'll get into kind of our all-time stuff. I know that's for him, I know that's a tough question because it's been 30 years of it, but.
Well, it was, man, I tell you what, you could go back on a lot of things. I can remember I remember playing. I think he was in the second grade, and we're out at playing in the Drew Central Pee Wee League, and of course they'd have 2 or 3 people gardening and this and that. And
So for people that aren't from Monticello, Drew Central is Monticello's rival.
Right.
And Dad's the basketball coach at Monticello, and he brought his son to Drew Central to play.
Yeah, it was. See, at Monticello at that time, you couldn't start playing Pee Wee basketball until you were in the 3rd grade. They had a 3rd and 4th grade level, and then a 5th and 6th grade. Well, Drew Central started theirs in the 2nd grade, so he went out for that, and kind of fought through those kind of things, and it without just saying a particular time. It was just the stuff that he would have to go through in terms of the way defenses played him, the way different things like that, and that he was able to fight through, not get discouraged, and just kind of fight through all of that stuff. And because the thing that's always been kind of, I've always thought, sometime evaluating high school players, even as a college coach, sometimes you evaluate a guy in a perfect situation. Let's say you got a guy that he's playing with 4 studs that defense got to guard off. Well, if you're a point guard in that situation, you're playing in so much space because people can't, they got to honor everybody else. Well, when you find a person that is not playing in space and can get stuff done, I think you have to look a lot closer at that person.
Did it bother you when it didn't work out that way?
Well, I thought people were making a mistake because I've seen people recruited out of those perfect, and I think in today's basketball, and I'm not saying coaches don't do that. I'm sure they figured it out because they're smart enough to do that. But on some of these super teams that are loaded, you better pay real close attention to your evaluations because some of those guys are working in ideal circumstances.
Yep.
And and some of those guys, like we used to watch Cincinnati when Bob Huggins he talk about in AAU, he would go to these back gyms that nobody else was, and he'd find these hidden jewels because these are those guys that are having to fight through all that kind of stuff.
One of my favorite stories is Coach Kane talking about Ja. Mm-hmm. And it's been kind of told so many times it kind of feels cliche, right? But the going to the back gym, the seeing a guy, not that he was unknown, but
he was unknown.
Meaning like that he was a complete nobody, but
right.
He wasn't on the first page of the
he wasn't
of
playing
the player
at the
list.
first gym on the main court that everybody was around watching.
He wasn't. Yeah, exactly. Because we remember, we remember the real deals and the good team. Everybody can be seen, right? But everybody isn't playing at Bud Walton. Mm-hmm. Some people are at Woodland Junior High.
Right. Right.
But you hear about those things and you look at where a guy is now, and it's like, it's not to say he wouldn't be where he is or whatever, but it's just, it's the people who look for the diamonds in the rough. It doesn't change, it doesn't make a diamond zirconium, but if it's in the rough, it's hard to assess that value and ultimately get your shot. And so I always respect particularly coaches that dig for the diamonds.
Yeah, and those are a lot of times those blue collar guys that find those. Huggins is probably maybe one of the best examples of a coach that would always have a guy, and you say, where did this guy come from? Where did he become a really good player? And we're saying, who's this guy? I never heard of this guy.
Gonzaga made their national bones on that.
Calhoun would do that. Calhoun the same way at UConn, and these guys would come up They were blue collar guys. They were fighters. They get there. They embrace the work, the development, and then they turn into really good players.
Yeah.
And so just kind of those things, just kind of with him, just kind of fighting through some of that stuff. And with you, I probably the memory that stands out. I remember you had a night at Whitehall. Well, I think you had like 5 or 6 3-point shots at Whitehall.
It was 8.
Oh, well, see, there we go. And see that I remember that night, and you were just in a zone that was unbelievable, just knocking them down.
And we just referenced that night because I think Bryan had like 30 or 40 that week. And I was kind of an afterthought after. Not for y'all, but like the town was kind of like, oh, that was great for 24 hours. I
remember that one for sure.
But yeah, and then I'm sure we have the same, was getting to witness, you win a state championship, which was big. We know you had already won one, but we all know, when you came to Monticello, you left some meat on the bone there at Delta from a talent perspective, and it was always something I really wanted, was to see you get another one, because you never know what's going to happen. But most people, we weren't alive, but most coaches, when you talk to them, say, man, he probably could have got a couple more of them things at Delta. So being able to see you win that one at Monticello was big. All right. Who are your favorite 3 players of all time? And I'll start because it's a hard question, because we debate this all the time. My
favorite 3.
My favorite 3.
Do 5. I got favorite 5.
We can do favorite 5 then. Mine is first was Shaq. Shaq was the first one that I saw that was. We talked about it last night, actually, about how few people look at careers anymore. They look at brands and personas and stuff. But Shaq was a Hall of Famer at 280 in Orlando, was a Hall of Famer in the first run with the Lakers when he was 300 and doing a little running, but getting into his low post game. And then thirdly, was kind of the end of the Laker run, and then that stint at Miami and Phoenix when he was passing the ball more, when he was just doing. To see somebody do it in multiple ways at a high level, he was the first one I ever saw do that. LeBron, I was not a LeBron fan coming out of high school. I'm an anti-hype guy.
Hated him.
I did. I was a Carmelo fan. But LeBron, he's 20 years in, and he probably won me over in year 3, and it hasn't looked back since. He's up there. Big Tim Duncan fan. I don't care I don't care how fundamental he was. It was basketball, and man, Jesus, he was just so good. Kobe, because we saw his journey. A lot of people remember the end with the Mamba mentality and all that. It wasn't him in the beginning. He had a journey to that level of focus. I'm not saying he wasn't a competitor from the beginning, but the journey of focused competitiveness is one that is often neglected. So it's a LeBron, 4. And then, man, the 5th is tough. It's probably Russell Westbrook for me. last one in his class to be signed. No one really thought he could be a point guard, and he technically kind of wasn't, but I don't think a lot of people. I mean, he was a first round pick, but I thought people thought that was a good gamble. I don't think they thought it was a surefire. To see a guy have that level of intensity and competitiveness, and take the hits even publicly that he did over his time, is something I'll never forget. And so you may not like his game, and I'm not saying he's one of the best ever, or he is one of the best ever, but I'm not saying he's one of my top 5 best players ever. But when you have learned how to be competitive and assertive and bring an attitude and an intensity to what you do, when you look at somebody who does that endlessly for over a decade and a half, and you know what it takes to bring that level of seriousness and dedication and intensity and energy and all those things, you tip your cap. I know a lot about a person as it relates to basketball by how they criticize Westbrook. Because there's a lot to criticize. Let's just be clear. But what you criticize him for tells me a lot about what kind of passion and intensity you bring to what you do. Because if you're questioning those things, then you probably don't know what that actually takes. If you're questioning decision-making, how he plays with the ball, whether he's a fit with the Lakers or whatever, totally valid, totally reasonable. But the people who personally attack how he approaches the game tells me a lot about them. So those are probably my 5.
My 5 would go Jordan. You know, obviously you grew up, you know, that was the first one you can think of, you know, really, you know, me watching and, you know, me coming up. That was in his prime, you know, three-peat, you know, second three-peat.
I remember the second one, but I don't.
I mean, more than, you know, second three-peat. I mean, just the way, you know, he was talked about. You could watch every game on WGN, which you couldn't see.
Yep.
And, you know, this was only, you know, you had your NBC games. So it wasn't like you was, like now we got certain nights or you got League Pass or got different ways they can watch games. Like you could see Jordan every
game.
Every game.
On Channel 9.
On WGN, Channel 9. So obviously him, you know, obviously we know the shoes, which is still rolling. I mean, he set the blueprint on that.
Yep.
And that would never be topped by anyone. So you go from Jordan. The next guy for me that I was a huge fan of was Penny. I was a huge
Vince Carter.
I was a huge Penny guy. You know, obviously he got derailed with the, you know, the injury with the microfracture, but man, just the way he played and to be that size, to be a point guard, and you know, he was a guy coming back up with the little penny and
shout out to Chris Rock.
Chris Rock, you know, he was well on his way with the shoe situation as well, and his shoes are still very big.
Yeah,
very, for a guy that didn't play as long at the level, you know, that we know he could have, but like his shoes are still very, very popular with kids. The next one obviously would be Shaq. You know, his dominance is
in a big man era, which I didn't say in my time, or when I was talking about Shaq. He was in the golden age of bigs. I mean, everybody didn't have a good big, but half the teams did. You know, you couldn't take a night off half the time or you'd get embarrassed.
But it's funny, and just kind of jumping back again to Penny a little bit. the AAU Nationals used to be at Jonesboro, and
They
I'm
just
over.
built the convocation center over there.
Yeah, so I'm at
Brandon.
I'm at Jonesboro at the AAU tournament, and there was a buddy of mine from Memphis. He said, "Man, you got to come over. This kid, you got to, you won't believe." And you hear that all the time. You say, "Oh yeah, all right." So we get in the car and we go over to this gym and we watch Penny. Penny's in. He's probably about the ninth grade or something like that. And he was phenomenal, man. And I went through the whole deal when the Hogs were recruiting him and this and that, and actually thought they had him. And some, so it was, but it makes me think back to back when he was a young kid, and he was phenomenal. Now,
Yeah.
So you're at Shaq.
Yeah. So I
Penny,
went Jordan,
Jordan.
Shaq, Penny. The next guy for me, I'm just kind of going down in the order, where they came. But the next guy who's probably had the biggest influence,
Allen Iverson.
Allen Ives. He's the first guy that I can remember you taking us over there to the pyramid and watching them.
The worst arena ever, by the way. It was the steepest, most close to get.
yeah, I remember that because that was he was at Georgetown and the Hogs played over there. Yeah, he was something.
Yeah, so that's the first game I can remember going to see. He was a freshman that was coming off Arkansas winning the national title the previous year, and he had 30 in the first game against the preseason, the number one team in the country, and to go in and see a freshman, a guy small, a small guy, which was you're not gonna be no Penny and LeBron or them kind of guy, but a guy that you could kind of say, hey man, I may have a opportunity, a guy at this size that they could do it.
But it's funny. We had gone. I used to take you guys. We'd go to Milwaukee during Christmas, and then we swing back through Indianapolis to the Nike camp and watch that. And I remember watching Iverson. I guess it was maybe the summer before his senior year.
It's when he got at the pen. He came fresh out the pen.
Yeah, I might have.
Yeah, I remember he was fresh out the pen.
And I remember watching him. He was the most aggressive player maybe that I've ever seen. His aggressiveness,
Kevin Garnett is
even out there with big players, his aggressiveness almost was just you can almost cut it with a knife. He was so aggressive. And it just stood out to me, man. He was out there, and his will and his presence and his aggressiveness on the floor was hard to describe. It's unbelievable.
The only person I've ever heard you compare it against was KG.
KG was like that. KG's was like that, but what made Iverson so different, he was little. He was a lot of times he was the smallest guy out there, but his aggressiveness was it was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, no, and I brought up Westbrook. Westbrook is the only version that I know that I could compare to what I saw, and it still doesn't. So as much as I just said about Russ, from an intensity and energy and all of this stuff,
it's unbelievable, man.
Iverson was above him, and that says a lot.
I mean, but I'm sitting up there and you watch it. I'm talking about the best of the best. Because at that point,
you had to go
all
to
of the best players were there.
Yep.
And and when he took the floor, his presence was just unbelievable.
Yeah, that was a year because I can remember watching all the little documentaries and stuff, and when they partying in, and he got out.
Y'all are missing the drive to that camp, that Nike camp, by the way.
I'm not missing. I know. You go ahead. I ain't missing it.
So Daddy just tried to make it say, we go to Milwaukee and we stop on the way back. Not always. We were driving to Indy, by the way. We weren't coming back from Milwaukee. at that time?
Well, one year I took y'all because one of y'all, I mean,
Me.
you were in
Duncan and Brendan.
yeah,
They
Yeah.
were pictures.
yeah, Duncan and I think maybe Grant Hill or some
Yeah.
of them guys. Yeah, one year we just drove up because I think you were like you were a little bitty sucker. I mean,
I remember the rain that we powered through for hours
Yeah,
in that
so,
drive. That's
yeah.
what we're referencing.
Nah, he forgetting the tanker. Remember that truck when when we stuck in traffic, then the truck turned over and they had spilled all
Yeah,
this
Oh, yeah.
switched
spilled.
up.
Yeah, that was spilled. And then there was one year we're coming through there, and we're driving through. It's like early in the morning, and there's a torso of a guy that's got hit. I don't know if he tried to come across the road in the traffic, and from here up is on the side of the road. That's all that's there.
So I don't remember that, y'all, because I wouldn't
Oh,
forget that
man.
one. But
It was
No, I remember that
unbelievable. We had some trips going up there, man. I mean, that was golly.
good job, Daddy. Good job making sure we didn't see that.
Oh God.
Yeah. So no, Iverson probably the biggest influence. First guy, I saw a game. The Georgetown stuff.
Oh man, what a brand, right? Memphis. Can you? We were too young to appreciate it, but John Thompson, Nolan Richardson,
John Chaney.
John Chaney, because it was a doubleheader. Coach won the national championship, only second to do that after John.
Yeah.
And they're playing each other in Memphis, and both teams are stacked.
Yeah. That's on. I mean, and the Georgetown.
And the brands, which is why I
Yeah,
brought
they
it
was
up.
just
The
such
brand
a-
was so cute. Arkansas and Georgetown was even after the national championship, Georgetown was still ahead from a brand, and that's probably because of DC and other things. But it was in vogue to wear Arkansas gear. It was in vogue to wear Georgetown
The
gear.
Georgetown deal, you always had a T-shirt under the jersey. I mean, that was what they kind of made famous there. Cause see, they played that game. They also had another game. I don't know if it was a year. It was during the Arkansas run. I don't know if they won the national championship or whatever. But anyway, because they had a bench clearing brawl in the game with them. But Coach, the trailblazing that John Thompson and Coach Richardson did was, man, it just kind of, you got to tip your hat to them.
And they had the ultimate respect for each other and were friends, by the way. So, which was also, I didn't understand it at the time. I was 4 or I was 5, but the seeing friends compete, I look back on it. It was something that was kind of foreign.
Yeah.
It was hard to get, and I think Bryan, you probably got a little bit of that with AAU because you were friends with your AAU teammates as well as you competed in practice and you played. Sometimes later on, you played them in their high school season. But a lot of people don't learn how to compete, and then a lot of people don't learn then how to compete against people they care about, which is a very hard thing to learn how to do.
We hear this every day.
Yeah.
Oh, these guys are too friendly. No, they know these guys because they've been playing AAU. Well, Magic and Bird, they didn't see these guys until they finally saw them
In the Final Four
college
or the national championship. Yeah.
So it was just, they didn't know. So obviously you built up this disdain for somebody because you keep hearing them talk about them, whereas you see these other guys all the way up. So it's just,
Kind of like you was talking about, a couple of guys yesterday and the animosity and all of that. That's not always true with everybody.
No. So who's your fifth?
the fifth one was obviously LeBron. I was just going in order.
Yeah.
LeBron. I mean, it's
Not much needs to be
ain't not much to be said, but remember seeing him that first time in Kingswood down there in Houston. He probably was 15 or so, and just the level of excellence he's exuded and to carry to have that burden to carry the lead from day one and still doing it. I don't know if you're gonna see that again.
No.
Because nobody wants to take the throne right now.
Oh yeah, they want to sit back and be the second layer, which is a little bit infuriating. We'll probably get to that to round this thing out. Daddy, who are your 5?
Well, man, mine probably starts with, I don't know if this is going to turn into 5 or 6, but I had Chamberlain was probably the first, Will Chamberlain was the first guy that really kind of jumped out at me as a basketball fan. And, he was just a freak of nature, man. It was, you talk about, he's one of the guys they widen the lane for because of him, because of his dominance.
He marked the end of the old key.
Yeah. I mean, and, it's funny with him, all of the classic battles they had with the Celtics, and because I was always a Laker fan, because either you were a Laker fan or a Celtic fan, and of course the Chamberlain-Russell battles were legendary, but Chamberlain was my first, and after that would obviously be Kareem, Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Alcindor was the LeBron of that era because he was in an era where basketball was not hyped to the degree that it is now. Man, he was a legendary figure, even out of high school, out of New York, that got all the publicity and this and that, and ended up obviously going to UCLA and
Without
winning.
social media.
Without social
like
media.
you were saying with LeBron.
Yeah, he was one of the
pre-social media.
Right, pre-social media.
It was an organic spreading the word of like, holy shit,
And he comes in and goes to UCLA at a time when freshmen were ineligible, so he had to sit out. And I think their freshman team actually beat their national championship team. And so, and the first college game that I remember was involving UCLA, and I was a huge UCLA fan. So Kareem, and then obviously you go down and being a great UCLA fan, I was a big fan of Walton.
Yeah.
A lot of people remember Walton as the announcer and kind of a little off the wall on as an announcer, but
Not little.
Man,
Big
but,
off the wall.
but guy, I'm gonna tell you what. As much as I love Kareem, Walton was the greatest college player I ever saw, without a doubt. I mean, the greatest college player I ever saw. Those of you that, you guys watched, and Bryan being an Arizona fan, you watched Luke Walton play. Luke wasn't the best physically, but he had a real good understanding of how to play. Yep. And see, Walton, his dad was a physically gifted, but with the same mentality. I mean, could really pass, could score, made everybody better. So, yeah, Walton would fall in there for me. And then, obviously, you're going to have Jordan. And Jordan, obviously, and kind of a theme with mine, we had Kareem, as I mentioned, Alcindor at that time. We mentioned, obviously, with Jordan, and then later with LeBron. All three of these were guys that came up through hype, and they were hype, but they delivered.
Jordan a little bit later, but
yes,
albeit he had to carry the league for a decade.
He had to carry, and he had all of the hype. And the thing with Jordan that was different. He didn't come with the hype out of high school.
Right.
He kind of had to grind his way and work his way. But once he got into the pros, the hype grew to such levels that a lot of folks wouldn't have been able to reach, but he kept getting it done. And where LeBron them had to battle it from high school
Junior
all the
high.
way.
Yeah, they were selling his jersey as a sophomore.
And you know, so you know, when I end with LeBron, and I'll go back and mention when you remember when Satch what was Satch's last name?
Sullinger.
Sullinger. I remember he's at camp in Razorback camp, and he's telling me about this 7th grader. That's just, he said, man, he's like, Satch was from Ohio, and he was talking. He said, man, this 7th grader back there, you wouldn't believe how good he is, and he just sung his praises. And again, when you've been in around the game for so long, you hear people say that all the time.
That you know have a history and remember guys that wouldn't say that unless
right.
Because he's a high school coach and legend in Ohio, so he ain't just
no, he's not gonna just say it, but you start thinking about after you've been in for so long, how many times have you heard somebody say, "Oh man, this guy." And I'm saying the guy, but so many of these guys, they're
OJ
not
Mayo.
that.
Yeah.
And but I remember Satch, and I remember when I was talking about earlier, the guy talking about Penny. I remember a guy talking about Chris Jackson or Mahmoud Abdul Rauf from Gulfport, and I was at a camp in Texas, and then these guys were telling me how good he was. So those guys stand out because they told me when these kids were before they had hit the national scene, and they were talking about how good they were. And so I remember that, but I remember Satch talking about LeBron, and those guys like LeBron, Kareem, and Jordan were able to deliver when everybody's expecting you to deliver, and they still deliver.
There's a little bit, and I'm interested to hear you guys because I think we all went through a flavor of this in our younger years. One thing I really struggled with in college, after I got over the hump of comparisons and things, the next hurdle, the next hump was, at least from a Monticello perspective, there was this transition from you're not your brother, blah, 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 blah. Then there's this transition towards everything that I eventually did was inevitable. Like, oh, I expected you to do that. Oh, blah, blah, blah. So you get robbed of the energy that comes from when you exceed someone's expectation. Because after you deliver, they say, well, those were my expectations. I admire those guys for that very reason. Because at a much smaller level, I understand, even though you begin to learn how to create your energy that's necessary for you to deliver, it could be equally hard as that is invigorating when you push yourself, you execute and beat your own self expectations, and then everybody around, or most of the people around you, say, well, of course. Have you experienced that, and does that experience, I know y'all have, but does that also color how you look at these players? Because it colored, Bryan never lets me forget I was not a LeBron fan, but it was going through that of, oh, you were destined. Oh, I knew you could. On things people ain't never, like, where I appreciated, holy crap, this dude is delivering. And he's been delivering. And everybody says it was going to happen. And everybody has set the ultimate expectation, like, even if he meets it, there's not much more to exceed it. And in LeBron's case, I think he has exceeded expectations. I changed my tune with LeBron when I had to realize how debilitating it can be and how hard it is to remain motivated when even when you push yourself, people say, oh, I knew you could do it. Can y'all talk through that type of, it's a privilege, but it's also an anvil when no matter what you do, or even when you're doing more than the vast majority of people, folks say they're unimpressed. They knew it was happening. Have you dealt with that, and does that color how you ranked your list, or does it impact your list?
I don't know if it really. I mean, I think it impacts because I think it's always harder to deliver when the pressure is on you and you're supposed to do it because the pressure's not on. If he does, man, he did. If he doesn't, then we don't ever talk about that person. So if a guy who has expectations on him and he doesn't deliver, then we're gonna talk about him. He didn't deliver, he didn't live up, he was a bust, he was yada yada yada. So when you are able to deliver, I think it's worth more.
Yep.
So I definitely take that into account. It's easier being the underdog guy.
Well, I tell you where it's and I'll kind of expand this a little bit. It kind of in coaching, it becomes a challenge with teams. When you get into those, let's say you're in a run or you're with a program that has won 4 or 5 years in a row.
Nick, you can talk about Nick Saban. You can go there with this.
You get it 4 or 5 years in a row, and then you have a group that thinks they're going to succeed just because everybody else, the ones before them, and they try to basically ride those successes and not put the work in and do. Now that's a challenge as much because it's so easy to fall into it when you're in a run with kids that are really talented, they get some things done, and then the ones that follow, they just kind of feel like that's preordained. I got this uniform on, it's gonna happen for me too. And that is super hard to guard against because a lot of times they don't understand what went into it and what goes into it, and they just think that's their birthright because they got this uniform on.
Dabo going through that now.
That is a very good point. You want to?
I mean, they've Clemson has been at a high level.
Absolutely.
Over the last, you can say decade, 8 to 10 years. A few national championships, a couple appearances where they lost, but high level players of Watson and Lawrence and those guys, Eddie in Jacksonville.
Yep. All the defensive linemen.
All those defensive linemen and stuff that they've had, and now that they transition into another phase, and obviously you still got the same expectations on you because this is what you've been doing, and you bringing that new crop in, and they probably expecting, hey man, they've been good the last 8, 9 years, 10 years. They're supposed to continue to flow like this. And now, they're facing some adversity. And now you're trying to get these guys to power through the adversity. Maybe, Dabo and this group is reevaluating maybe some things that they've done. Maybe they got to evolve or what have you. But,
and that's why, regardless of what happens in the playoffs this year, that's why you have to tip your hat to Saban at Alabama because they're riding at the top. Then Georgia comes in and they're boom, boom. And now it would be very easy for Alabama to kind of settle back, but now he's been able to get them back to a level where they are competing again, and it's hard once you fall from that because it's kind of like the Mike Tyson situation in boxing. Before before Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson was invincible in everybody's eyes. But then once Buster Douglas beat Tyson, the world didn't look at the boxing world. When they got in the ring, they didn't fear Tyson the way they did before. They saw some vulnerabilities there. So for Saban to get Alabama off the canvas and back up where I'm in here swinging for a championship again is much of a testament to him as a coach and them as a program as anything they've ever did.
I agree. Y'all know I'm a Patriots fan, and we're down right now. But I think the thing that bothers me more than the losing, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is the perception of Belichick that's taking a hit, and it's very similar to the Saban thing where we had a 19-year run in the professional sport that has the most parity. And you did it one way through the first three out of the 4 years, and then you didn't make the playoffs for 2 years, and then you had to kind of reinvent yourself. You're running up against the Paytons, and then Ben Roethlisberger is developed, and then you got the Ravens defensively, and you're like, dang, this is it's gonna be hard to do. Oh man, right? It felt like Indy was in the AFC East because it felt like we played them every year, which was weird in a random scheduling.
It wasn't weird.
They
had to put.
They had to play.
They did it on purpose.
But he wasn't just arguably with Walsh or Shula is the greatest coach of all time. But he didn't just do it one. Yes, he had Brady that whole time, but they did it different ways, and they won championships basically in 3 different ways, 3 different eras, 3 different styles. Saban's had his opportunity to do that now, and if he can get it done this year, he would have done it in 3 different complete styles. And y'all are coaches. How many guys, without naming names, how many guys have retired recently because they don't want to have to do it a different way again?
Yeah, you look in college basketball. I don't think Kay wanted to deal with some of this stuff. I don't think Roy wanted to deal with something. I know they were older and wanted to, but
Jay Wright.
Jay Wright. I mean, it's I just
it's draining to have to live up to the same standard in a different way when people don't understand that a different way may not appear different when you're a fan. So Alabama, they may see a different quarterback style or style of offense, but they're not seeing how different I have to coach this group or how different I have to fortify my culture, adapt it but not lose it. Like all of these little bitty things that you can't see unless you're in it. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people appreciate.
On the basketball side, I think it's Cal. On the level they were for a while.
Yeah.
And then they've had good teams. They haven't been at the level that they've been. And it's hard. And they they look different this year than they have. Now we'll see how it ends up, but they're playing differently and they got different kind of guys, but it's similar to what we're talking about with the
and it's not easy.
It's not easy.
No, it's actually it's harder than building.
Well, and I think it becomes hard, and I guess I use the football situation for this reason. I don't think there's anything harder than changing your mentality in terms of physicality and this and that and finesse and to see Alabama do a about face in physicality and how they went about doing things opposed to the last several years has been it's been impressive to watch.
Yeah.
And so to me, Saban has did this. Like, I don't know how the playoffs, they might lose to Michigan first. I don't know, but I think this has been as impressive a coaching job as he's done.
You agree?
Yeah, it's probably got to be up there. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. Last one. And that I'll let you ask me and Bryan a couple questions. Who's your favorite coach of all time and why? Basketball coach.
John Wooden.
John Wooden.
No doubt. No, I mean, I grew up watching him on the sidelines with that program rolled up, and just watched him come through eras with different players, and he just won with dignity. He was the same. He's just a consistent individual, and his teams played that way.
And he had some good men come out of his program too.
Man,
Because a lot of people don't talk about Alcindor and what he immediately stepped into after his freshman year with the Cleveland Summit and stuff like that. And I'm not saying it was John Wooden that did that, but the program at UCLA, I'm sure it played a part in preparing him to be up there with the no pun intended, the heavyweights with Ali
to
and
me,
others.
though, with him was I remember watching an interview that Charlie Rose had Coach Wooden and Bill Walton on, and he was talking about how their first day, he taught them how to tie their shoes. He taught them, I mean, just every little detail. But within that, he allowed Walton to be the the free spirit he was. He allowed Kareem to be the kind of revolutionary type figure he was. And so within the context of team, he allowed those guys to be individuals and still bring them together as a team. Because he had some personalities, whether it was Walden, Kareem, Sidney Wicks, it was a bunch of guys like that were personalities. But he to see their teams, man, they were, and everybody was rooting. If you weren't a UCLA fan, you were rooting for them to lose. And they just came out there and literally got it done.
Yeah. What about you?
It's gonna be Ludosa. Point guard. I just grew up watching all those guards.
Name a couple.
Damon Stoudemire, Khalid Reeves.
That was one of your favorites.
Mike Bibby, Jason Gardner, Gilbert Arenas, Jason Terry. The list goes. Andre Iguodala.
Oh, you didn't have to bring up Andre.
Richard Jefferson.
That was supposed to be in favor.
Sean Elliott.
Yeah, Sean Elliott, Hassan Adams. Those
sneaky good right there.
Those Mustafa Shakur. Those. He had some big time guards, and he allowed them the freedom.
Yeah, very few of them are the same.
No.
They were different.
Man, I was watching,
which is hard to do.
I was watching a clip. It was probably about 25, 30 minutes of Arkansas going to Tucson. They had Daryl Hawkins and a bunch of them. Man, it was unbelievable. It was a war. I mean, the arena was packed, and it was just every possession was it was unbelievable.
Yeah. So, it would be him. You know, missing Miles Simon.
Yeah.
Still, I think the best shooter, Salim Stoudemire.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, he was over 50 from three, lefty.
They
You
were
know,
good.
he always had really good team, free flowing, and as a guard, you always watch those, and just the ability, and we talked earlier about development.
Oh,
Getting
yeah.
some under the radar guys. He had guys that he brought along. I mean, nobody thought. You got a guy like Shannon Fry. How he came along.
You know, my favorite Arizona player was that kid he had from Chicago. That
Michael Wright.
Man, Michael Wright was my favorite Arizona player. Man, he that's so good. He was tough, boy.
I like the Gilbert Arenas team.
Yeah.
They were just different. Similar to what you were saying about Coach Wooden, it seemed like Coach Olson just kind of let them be who they were. But he also wasn't afraid of pieces that he had to figure out how they worked.
He knew what he wanted. I mean, and see, some of these guys, you get to the point where you don't have to. Your recruits don't have to be validated by by the rankings and this and that, because he sees it. If that's what he knows what he wants when he sees it, he don't care if 247 has got him ranked. He didn't care. Don't care about that.
Yeah, and that's what I respect. To close us out, mine is it's probably Coach Richardson, and it's probably less. It was because of how close we were allowed to be at the height of his power. Being able to go out to the farm, being able to hear him teach. Bryan and I were talking about, his first time at camp, and then you knew at night at 7, your sophomores, juniors, and seniors were going to play, pick up with the guys who were on campus at the time at the middle court. And, like, his presence, like, the command of respect, he didn't ask for it. He got it. And then those gems that I still hear, echoed throughout Bud Walton, the attitude determines your altitude. If it is to be, it's up to me. Like, those are the things, and, like, man, just the level of non-basketball inspiration that he delivered to you. The attitude is so hard to coach attitude. Yeah. We always say, if a dog's gonna bite, he'll do it as a pup. It's very hard to improve or make a mentality more ferocious. He was one of the few that he wasn't going to create it for you, but he could take it, that ferocity, that intensity, to the next level, even if you were a Todd Day, or even if you were a Joe Johnson, who's as laid back as you get, right? He knew how to sharpen you. And to be able to do that in the way that he did it, with love, and to be able to witness that, and also to see how important family was to augment how hard he coached. Everybody was a part of his family that had to endure him, which is something I've learned even as I've gotten older and working in my career, that if you're gonna be hard on someone and you're gonna demand things, you gotta make sure that they know that you care. Right. And so his ability to not just be a hard ass, but to do that knowing that at the end of the day, I'm doing this for you, and the way that I show you that is how I cultivate family. There's probably other people out there that did it, but as far as what I saw and experienced, nobody did it better than Coach Nolan Richardson. Like nobody.
Well, and you know, and when I say from just from a strictly basketball standpoint, and I mentioned obviously I outlined Coach Wooden, and kind of the piggyback kind of what you said about Coach Richardson. Well, we were able to sit down with him, and you know, he and I had conversations about everything from you know, his early years at the university and the difficulties that he had to, and I mean, and he was just candid with. I mean, he didn't. I mean, well, I'm not going to obviously go into some of the details, but he was very candid in some of the things that went on, and I could relate to when I was coming up that a lot of times that because when I started at an all-black school, and many times a teacher would have to, if they came to work at the school, they had to find them somewhere to live. They couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. And he would talk about when they would go somewhere to play and they would have to find a black family for him to stay with while the rest of the team stayed in hotels. And so a lot of the things that he talked about were things that maybe I hadn't, in some maybe I had experienced, but some at least I knew of that happening. So his stuff was probably more personal and you could kind of relate to it because he was very relatable, and with the people that he knew, he was brutally honest.
He was brutally honest.
Brutally honest.
Relatable, memory like a steel trap. He asked about if I ever see him, I do have to remind him. I can tell he recognizes the face, but immediately once you say Brendan, Sherrer, well, how's Wayne doing? How's Bryan doing? Is he still in coaching? Is blah 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 blah. He cared in a way that is hard. It's hard to do, and
when we saw what he went through at the end of his tenure at the university, we could kind of look at it, interpret it in a different way because we knew him and we knew the things that he had, the challenges that he had faced, and the fact that he was honest. We could probably view that in a manner that a lot of folks couldn't.
Well, because it was the culmination of things, it wasn't an event at Kentucky that led to the press conference.
Build up.
It was a build up. So,
Right.
well, I appreciate y'all going through all of this with me, and you know, it's always a pleasure to sit down with you all. These are the conversations we have all the time, but wanted to share a little bit of that insight into Bryan, but also kind of our outlook on basketball from the giants of the game from our point of view. So Merry Christmas to everybody, and I appreciate you sharing some time with myself and my dad and my brother, and I hope you all enjoy.
Appreciate it.